Hi guys, and welcome to Bedtime History Relaxing. Tonight we step onto a creaking wooden deck as the fog loosens its grip on a crowded bay and the first pale light of morning reveals a forest of ship masts rising from the water like bare winter trees. The air smells of salt tar and something less romantic that you cannot quite place at first. You lean forward, squinting as the shoreline of San Francisco slowly takes shape. It is not the neat, promising city you may have imagined. It looks raw, uneven, almost unfinished, and yet it hums with energy. You probably would not survive this. Not because of anything dramatic right away, but because everything here seems to push against comfort. The ground ahead is not truly ground. It is mud. Thick, clinging, determined mud that seems to want to keep your boots as souvenirs. The buildings are a patchwork of canvas wood and hopeful improvisation. Nothing feels settled, everything feels temporary. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, share your location and the time where you are right now. Now, dim the lights. You step off the ship carefully, your weight shifting as the plank beneath your feet flexes. The harbour is crowded beyond anything you have seen before. Ships sit anchored in tight clusters, some clearly abandon their sails hanging slack, their decks quiet. Others bustle with activity as passengers and goods move in a constant flow. A widely accepted historical detail is that many sailors deserted their vessels upon arrival, rushing inland in search of gold, leaving ships to drift or be repurposed as storage hotels or even prisons. You pause for a moment, watching as a man ahead of you nearly loses his balance, one boot sinking deep into the mud with a soft, wet sound. He pulls it free with effort, leaving behind a hollow imprint that slowly fills with murky water. The sound of voices surrounds you. English, Spanish, Cantonese, and others you cannot quite identify blend into a steady murmur. It feels less like a city and more like a crossroads where the entire world has decided to meet at once. There is a strange rhythm here. Not orderly, not predictable, but constant. People move quickly even when they are unsure where they are going. You notice how few seem relaxed. Everyone appears to be thinking, calculating, anticipating the next step. It is as if the ground itself demands urgency. You adjust your grip on your small bundle of belongings, suddenly aware of how little you have brought with you. Around you, crates are being unloaded, barrels, rolled sacks dragged across uneven planks. A man shouts instructions that are only half followed. Another argues loudly over a price that seems absurdly high for something as simple as a shovel. Prices here are something else entirely. There is a commonly acknowledged fact that basic goods in San Francisco during the gold rush could cost many times what they did elsewhere, sometimes reaching levels that feel almost unreal. A single egg ticketing might cost what an entire meal would elsewhere. You begin to understand that gold is not the only thing being mined here. Opportunity itself is being extracted, refined, and sold at a premium. You take a cautious step forward, then another, testing the ground. Each movement requires attention. The mud is not uniform. Some patches hold firm enough, while others swallow your foot without warning. Planks have been laid in places, forming narrow walkways that creak under weight and shift slightly with each step. You follow one of these paths, joining a loose line of people moving inland. As you walk, the smell becomes clearer. It is not just the sea, it is waste animals, cooking fires, and damp wood all mixed together. It is not unbearable, but it is persistent. It clings to the air and seems to settle into your clothes almost immediately. You breathe through it, adjusting as everyone else seems to have done. A small detail that often surprises people is that some ships in the harbour were transformed into buildings. You glance back briefly and can almost imagine it. A vessel pulled close to shore, its hull fixed in place, its interior repurposed into rooms and storage. It feels strange but also fitting. Nothing here remains what it once was for long. You pass a group of men gathered around a rough table set directly on the mud. They are examining something small, passing it between them with careful attention. Gold, perhaps. or something they hope is gold. Their faces are serious, their voices low. You sense that even here at the very edge of arrival, the search has already begun. Historians still argue whether most people who came here truly expected to strike it rich, or whether many simply hoped for a chance at something different from the lives they had left behind. As you watch the expressions around you, it feels like a mixture of both. There is excitement, yes, but also a quieter determination, as if each person carries a private calculation of risk and reward. You continue along the plank path, the city slowly opening ahead of you. Tents cluster together in uneven rows, their canvas sides shifting gently in the breeze. Wooden structures stand beside them, some sturdy, others leaning slightly as if unsure of their own stability. Smoke rises in thin lines from cooking fires, drifting upward before being pulled sideways by the wind. There is a sound you begin to notice beneath everything else. A steady, almost constant hammering, nails driven into wood, boards being cut, lifted, fitted into place. The city is not just busy. It is being built in real time, each moment adding something new, even as other parts fall into disrepair. You step off the plank briefly, testing the mud again. Grips your boot, holding it for just a second longer than you would like before releasing it with a quiet, sticky pull. You step back onto the wood, deciding that for now the narrow path is preferable. A man brushes past you, his coat worn, his face lined with fatigue. He moves with purpose, not looking at you, not looking at anything in particular, as if following a path only he can see. You wonder where he is going, to the mines, to a job, to somewhere he can simply rest. You realize then that arrival is only the beginning. Whatever you imagined this place to be, it is more complicated, more demanding, and more alive than any simple idea could capture. You pause at a slight rise, turning just enough to look back at the harbour once more. The ships, the fog, the endless movement. It already feels a little distant, even though you have only just stepped away from it. Ahead, the city waits, not welcoming, not unwelcoming, simply there, full of possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. You take a breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle quietly into you. And then you step forward. You move deeper into the city, though it does not yet feel like a city in the way you might expect. There is no clear boundary, no moment where arrival becomes belonging. Instead, everything seems to unfold in uneven layers, each step revealing something slightly more crowded, slightly more defined, and yet still uncertain. The plank beneath your feet narrows, then splits, branching into several directions. No signs guide you. No clear system organizes the movement. You hesitate for a moment, watching how others choose their paths. Some follow the widest boards, others cut straight across the mud, trusting their balance, or simply accepting the risk. You choose the planks again. They creak softly under your weight, each step producing a hollow sound that blends into the constant noise around you. Voices rise and fall. Laughter breaks through in quick bursts. Somewhere nearby, metal strikes metal in a steady rhythm. It feels less like a collection of separate sounds and more like a single continuous pulse. A well-established historical observation is that San Francisco during the early gold rush expanded so rapidly that formal planning could not keep up. Streets appeared where people walked often enough. Buildings rose where space seemed available. Order came later, if it came at all. You begin to notice how this lack of structure shapes everything. A tent leans against a wooden wall, as if the two were meant to support each other. A narrow alley forms not because it was designed, but because two structures happen to leave just enough space between them. Nothing feels permanent yet, everything feels used. A man calls out as you pass, offering tools laid out on a rough cloth, picks, shovels, pans, all worn to some degree. His voice carries urgency, but also a practiced rhythm, as if he has repeated his call hundreds of times already. You slow just enough to glance at the prices scratched onto a small board beside him. They seem high, though you have little frame of reference yet. Still something in you hesitates. A curious detail from the period is that some merchants adjusted their prices several times a day, depending on demand and rumour. If word spread that gold had been found in abundance somewhere inland, the cost of tools and supplies could rise almost instantly. You can almost imagine it happening here even now, as whispers move faster than any official notice. You continue on, your attention drawn to a group gathered near a partially constructed building. The frame stands tall, its wooden beams exposed, while men climb and move along its edges with a confidence that feels both impressive and slightly alarming. There are no safety measures that you can see, no ropes to catch a fall, no barriers to prevent it, just balance, experience, and perhaps a certain acceptance of risk. You pause watching as one of them lifts a plank into place, adjusting it carefully before hammering it down with quick, precise strikes. The sound echoes briefly, then fades into the larger rhythm of the city. You realize that this is how everything here comes into being, piece by piece, moment by moment, without pause. Historians still argue whether the speed of construction in gold-rushed San Francisco led to more opportunity or more instability in the long run. As you look around, it feels like both are true at once. The city grows because it must, but in growing so quickly, it carries a certain fragility within it. You step off the plank again, this time more intentionally. The mud shifts beneath your weight, but you adjust, finding a slower, more careful rhythm. It is not comfortable, but it feels more direct. You are no longer just following the path others have set. You're choosing your own way, even if it is only a few steps at a time. A wagon rolls past you, its wheels cutting deep tracks into the soft ground. The driver leans forward slightly, guiding the horses with quiet commands. The animals move steadily, their hooves sinking, and lifting each step a small effort. The wagon carries barrels, their contents unknown to you, but clearly important enough to warrant the struggle. You step aside, giving them space, and feel the ground tremble slightly as they pass. The sound of the wheels, the strain of the harness, the low murmur of the driver all blend into a moment that feels both ordinary and significant. This is how goods move. This is how the city sustains itself. You notice then how few things here are easy. Even the simplest tasks seem to require effort, adjustment, patience. Walking, carrying, building, buying, everything demands attention. And yet there is something else beneath it. A sense of momentum, as if all of this difficulty is being accepted, even embraced because of what might come from it. You move toward a cluster of tents where the fabric shifts gently in the breeze. The light filters through the canvas, creating soft, uneven patterns on the ground. Inside one, you glimpse a man sitting on a crate, his head lowered, his hands resting loosely in his lap. He looks neither defeated nor triumphant, simply still. You wonder how long he's been here. Days, weeks, long enough for the initial rush to settle into something quieter, perhaps. Long enough to understand that this place does not reveal its rewards quickly. Another small but telling detail from the era is that many newcomers spent their first days simply adjusting, learning how to move, where to buy, whom to trust. The idea of immediately rushing to the goldfields was not always practical. The city itself required a kind of orientation. You feel that now? You are not lost exactly, but you are not yet grounded either. Each step teaches you something new, where the planks are more stable, which areas feel more crowded, where the sounds change in subtle ways. A voice rises nearby, sharper than the rest. An argument, though you cannot catch the words clearly. Two men stand close, their gestures quick, their faces tense. Others glance over briefly, then return to their own concerns. Conflict here does not seem unusual. It is simply another part of the environment. You continue on, choosing a slightly wider path that leads between rows of structures. The ground here feels a bit firmer though, still uneven. You adjust your pace, finding a rhythm that feels sustainable. Not too fast, not too slow. The city does not slow for you, but you begin to move with it. You pass a small stand where food is being prepared over an open flame. The smell catches your attention immediately. Something warm, something filling. You pause for a moment, watching as a woman stirs a pot, her movements steady and practiced. People gather nearby, exchanging coins, receiving bowls, moving on. You realize how quickly the practical needs assert themselves. Food, shelter, work. The larger dream of gold sits somewhere beyond all this, but here in this moment it is the immediate things that matter most. You take another step forward, then another, feeling slightly more certain than before. Not comfortable, not yet, but no longer entirely unsure. You follow the scent of cooking a little longer than you intended, your steps slowing as the warmth from the nearby fire reaches you, gentle waves. The contrast with the damp air settles into your skin, and for a brief moment you understand how even a small comfort can feel significant here. But you cannot stand there forever. You shift your weight and continue on, your attention drifting towards the question that has been quietly forming in the back of your mind since you stepped off the ship. Where will you sleep? The thought does not feel dramatic. It feels practical, immediate, and slightly heavier with each step. Around you, the city continues its restless motion, but now you begin to notice spaces in a different way. Not just as places people pass through, but as places they might stay. A broadly recognized historical reality is that housing in early gold rush San Francisco was scarce, improvised, and often extremely expensive. Many newcomers found themselves sleeping wherever space could be found, whether in crowded tents, shared rooms, or even repurposed ships along the harbour. You slow near a cluster of canvas tents arranged in a loose, uneven line. The fabric shifts softly in the breeze, edges frayed in places, ropes pulled tight and anchored into the ground with wooden stakes. Some tents are larger, reinforced with extra layers. Others are little more than thin coverings stretched over simple frames. You pause near one where the entrance hangs slightly open. Inside you catch a glimpse of blankets piled on a low platform, a crate serving as a table, a lantern resting unlit beside it. It is sparse, but it is something. A man sits just outside his back against a post, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He does not move as you approach, though you sense he is aware of you. You hesitate, then offer a small nod. He lifts his head just enough to acknowledge you, then gestures vaguely toward the tent. Space, he says, his voice quiet, almost tired. You step closer, your boots pressing into the softer ground. Up close you notice the details. The seams of the canvas are patched in places. The ropes are worn but secure. The man watches you not with suspicion exactly, but with a kind of measured interest. He names a price. It is higher than you expected, though you are not entirely sure what you expected. You pause, considering. The amount feels steep for what is essentially a shared patch of ground beneath canvas. Yet the idea of continuing to wander, of searching longer, carries its own cost. A lesser known detail from the time is that even the most basic shelter could command surprising prices, especially near the harbour where demand was highest. Some people paid simply for the right to sleep on a floor, sharing space with strangers whose names they never learned. You nod slowly, reaching for your coins. The exchange is quick, almost casual, no paperwork, no formal agreement. Just an understanding that for now, this space is yours as much as it is anyone else's. You duck inside, adjusting to the dimness. The air is warmer than outside, though it carries a mix of scents. Damp fabric, worn wool, a faint trace of smoke. It is not unpleasant, but it is dense, as if the space holds onto everything that enters it. You set your belongings down near the edge of the platform, choosing a spot that feels slightly less crowded. The wood beneath you is uneven, the boards not perfectly aligned. When you shift your weight, they respond with a soft creak. You sit for a moment, letting the stillness settle around you. Outside, the city continues without pause. Voices drift through the canvas walls, softened, but still present. Footsteps pass close by, then fade. Somewhere nearby, laughter rises briefly, then disappears. You lie back carefully, testing the surface. The blankets beneath you are rough but serviceable. They hold a faint warmth, as if someone rested here not long ago. You adjust your position, finding a place where the uneven boards press a little less sharply against your back. Sleep does not come immediately. It is not just the unfamiliar setting. It is the constant presence of sound. Even softened by the canvas, the city does not truly quiet. It hums, it shifts, it breathes in a way that feels continuous. A commonly discussed point among historians is how difficult rest could be in such rapidly growing settlements. Noise crowding and the general uncertainty of daily life often made deep, uninterrupted sleep a rare luxury. You turn slightly onto your side, pulling the blanket closer around you. The fabric scratches lightly against your skin, a reminder of its coarseness. You close your eyes, then open them again, adjusting to the dim light filtering through the canvas. Time feels different here. You're not sure how long you have been lying there when the man from outside steps in. He moves quietly with the practiced ease of someone familiar with the space. He sets down a small bundle, then lowers himself onto another section of the platform. He does not speak. You watch him for a moment, then close your eyes again. There is something about his presence that feels steady. Not comforting exactly, but predictable. You begin to notice smaller details. The way the canvas shifts with each passing breeze, the faint tapping sound as one of the ropes rubs gently against its stake, the distant rhythm of hammering that never seems to fully stop. A quirky detail from the period is that some people preferred sleeping in shifts, not always by choice, but because space was limited, and the city's activity rarely paused long enough for everyone to rest at once. You wonder if that will become your rhythm as well. Your body begins to relax, not fully, but enough that your thoughts slow slightly. The initial tension of arrival softens, replaced by a quieter awareness of your surroundings. You're here now, not just passing through, not just observing from a distance. You have taken a small step into the life of this place, however temporary it may be. You shift again, finding a position that feels marginally more comfortable. The blanket settles around you, its weight light but noticeable. Outside, the sounds continue, but they begin to blend together, less distinct, more like a distant current than a series of separate interruptions. You take a slow breath, then another, and for the first time since you stepped onto the dock, you feel the possibility of rest, even if it is imperfect, even if it is brief. Your eyes close, not fully at first, but enough. You wake slowly, not because the world has quieted, but because your body has decided it has rested enough. The sounds outside never fully stopped. They only shifted, softened, rearranged themselves into something that your mind eventually learned to ignore. Light filters through the canvas above you, pale and uncertain. It is not a strong morning light. It feels diffused, as if the sun itself is unsure how to reach this place through layers of fog and smoke. You blink, adjusting your eyes, tracing the faint seams in the fabric overhead. For a moment you remain still. The blanket rests unevenly across you, one edge folded beneath your side, the other slipping toward the floor. The wooden boards beneath your back remind you of their presence with a dull, steady firmness. It is not comfort, but it is enough. Your stomach tightens slightly. Hunger arrives without ceremony. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb the balance of the platform. The man from the night before is already gone. His space is empty, the blanket folded loosely as if he left without much thought. There is no sign of when he left or where he went, that you realize may be normal here. You step outside, the air cooler than you expect. It carries a sharpness that wakes you more fully. The ground is still damp, though not as deeply muddy as before. The surface has shifted, compressed by the movement of many feet, forming uneven patterns that catch the light in small reflective patches. Nearby, the cooking fire from yesterday has been replaced by a more active scene. A small group gathers around a makeshift stand where food is being prepared. Steam rises from a pot, curling into the morning air before disappearing. You move toward it, your steps more certain than they were the day before. A widely recognized truth about life in Gold Rush San Francisco is that food was both essential and unpredictable. Supplies arrived irregularly, prices fluctuated sharply, and the quality could vary from one meal to the next. What mattered most was availability. You join the edge of the group, watching as bowls are filled and passed along. The contents are simple. A thick mixture, likely some form of porridge or stew, though it is difficult to identify the exact ingredients. It does not matter. It is warm, and it smells faintly of something savoury. You exchange coins, noticing again how quickly they leave your hand. The bowl is heavier than you expect. You step aside, finding a place near a wooden crate, and lower yourself carefully onto it. The surface is rough but stable enough. You take your first bite. It is hotter than expected, and you pause, letting it cool slightly before continuing. The texture is uneven, the flavour simple, but it fills the sepulchre that hunger has opened. Around you, others eat quickly, some standing, some crouched, few taking the time to sit fully. A lesser-known aspect of daily life here is that meals were often rushed not out of preference but necessity. Time felt valuable, and the act of eating was frequently squeezed between tasks, conversations, and decisions that seemed more urgent. You find yourself slowing down instead, not deliberately, but because something in you resists the pace. You take another bite, then another, allowing the warmth to settle gradually. The sounds around you continue. Voices overlap footsteps past the city moves. You listen without focusing on any single conversation. Fragments reach you. Someone speaking of a claim further inland. Another complaining about the cost of supplies. Brief laugh that fades quickly into something more serious. It is as if every interaction carries a layer of calculation beneath it. You finish the bowl, scraping the last of it with your spoon. It is not satisfying in the way you might hope, but it is enough to carry you forward. You stand returning the bowl to the edge of the stand where others have begun to stack them. For a moment you consider what comes next. There is no clear instruction, no path laid out. The city offers options, but it does not guide you towards them. You must choose even if you do not yet fully understand what you're choosing. A point often discussed by researchers is whether most newcomers intended to stay in the city long or merely pass through on their way to the goldfields. The answer seems uncertain, shaped by circumstance more than initial plans. As you stand here, you feel that uncertainty yourself. You begin to walk again, letting your steps carry you through a different part of the settlement. The structures here feel slightly more established. Wooden walls stand taller, their edges more defined. Some buildings have signs painted roughly but clearly enough to read. Names that promise good services, opportunities. You pass one where tools are displayed more neatly than before, arranged in rows that suggest a kind of order. Another offers clothing, though. The fabrics look worn, their colours faded from use or exposure. You pause briefly at the edge of a small open space where a man stands behind a table covered with items you cannot immediately identify. Small objects, some metallic, some glass, all arranged with care. He picks one up as you approach, holding it up to the light. Better quality, he says, though you are not sure what he's comparing it to. You nod politely, then move on. Not everything demands your attention. You begin to notice how your awareness has shifted since yesterday. You are still uncertain, still new, but you are no longer overwhelmed in quite the same way. Details that once blurred together now separate slightly. Paths become clearer. Movements more predictable. A curious observation from the time is that adaptation happened quickly for many people, not because conditions improved, but because expectations adjusted. What once felt chaotic began to feel normal. You feel that adjustment beginning. You step onto a wider plank, your balance steady now, your pace more natural. The city continues around you, unchanged in its energy but different in your perception. You're not yet part of it, but you are no longer entirely outside it either. And as you move forward, you realize that even something as simple as finding breakfast has already become part of your understanding of this place. Not just what it is, but how it is lived. You continue along the wider plank, your steps finding a steadier rhythm, now that your body has learned what to expect. The boards flex slightly beneath you, but not enough to throw you off balance. You no longer watch every step with the same caution. Instead, your attention begins to lift, taking in more of what surrounds you. The ground to either side of the planks remains uncertain. Mud, though slightly compacted, still holds the memory of every foot, every wheel, every hoof that has pressed into it. It forms ridges and shallow pools that reflect the muted sky above. You notice how some people still choose to walk through it, either out of impatience or familiarity. Their boots sink and rise with a quiet, persistent sound. You stay on the planks. They are narrow, in places forcing people to pass carefully. When someone approaches from the opposite direction, there is a brief negotiation. One of you pauses, shifts slightly, perhaps steps aside onto a more stable patch of ground if one can be found. It is not spoken, it simply happens. A well-documented aspect of early San Francisco is that proper streets were slow to emerge and wooden walkways became essential for navigating the muddy terrain. These planked paths were often built privately, sometimes even charging a small fee for use, turning something as simple as walking into a kind of transaction. You glance down at the boards beneath your feet, imagining that possibility. paying just across from one place to another. It does not seem impossible here. Ahead, the walkway rises slightly, forming a gentle incline over a deeper stretch of mud. The boards here are newer. Their edges sharper, their surface less worn. Someone has taken the time to improve this section, likely because enough people pass through it to make the effort worthwhile. You step onto the incline, feeling the subtle shift in your balance. The city reveals itself in layers as you gain even this small height. Roofline, canvas top smoke drifting upward. It is not a grand view, but it offers a sense of perspective. You pause at the top just for a moment. A man behind you clears his throat softly, not impatient, but enough to remind you that standing still here is unusual. You move on, stepping down the other side. As you continue, you notice something new. A stretch of ground where the mud has been covered more fully with wooden boards, not just narrow planks, but wider sections for is something closer to a proper street. The boards are uneven, some slightly raised, others dipping under weight, but together they create a surface that feels more stable. You step onto it and feel the difference immediately. Your stride lengthens, your shoulders relax slightly. The effort of balancing lessens, replaced by a more natural motion. A commonly accepted historical detail is that as the gold rush progressed, parts of San Francisco began to develop more substantial infrastructure, with wooden roads and sidewalks gradually replacing the worst of the mud. These improvements often followed patterns of use rather than formal planning. You walk along this broader surface, noticing how people move differently here. Conversations last a little longer. Movements are less hurried. There is still urgency, but it softens slightly when the ground itself does not demand constant attention. To your left, a man struggles to pull a cart from a muddy patch onto the wooden surface. The wheels resist sinking just enough to hold him back. Another man steps in without being asked, pushing from behind. Together they manage to lift the cart forward, the wheels finding the boards with a heavy, satisfying thud. They exchange a brief nod, no words. Then they move on in separate directions. A lesser discussed detail from accounts of the time is how moments of quiet cooperation appeared in unexpected ways. In a place driven by individual ambition, small acts of assistance still surfaced, often brief and unremarked. You continue your pace, steady, your awareness widening. The sounds here feel slightly different. The hollow echo of footsteps on wood replaces the softer, muffled sound of mud. The rhythm becomes more defined, almost percussive, as many feet move across the boards at once. You begin to notice patterns. Where the boards are strongest, people gather. Where they weaken, movement becomes more cautious. The city organizes itself not through rules, but through you. You pass a section where one of the boards has cracked its edge, lifting slightly. People step around it instinctively, adjusting their path without breaking stride. It is a small imperfection, but it shifts the flow, creating a subtle curve in what might otherwise be a straight line. You follow that curve, your steps aligning with those ahead of you. A point that continues to interest historians is how quickly informal systems of movement and behavior developed in places like this. Without formal planning, people still found ways to navigate efficiently, creating patterns that later shaped the city's more permanent structure. You feel that system around you now. It's not written, but it is understood. You slow slightly as the wooden surface narrows again, returning to a series of planks. The transition is noticeable. Your steps shorten, your attention sharpens once more. The city shifts with you. You pass a small group standing near the edge of the walkway, their attention focused on something below. You glance down and see a boot half submerged in the mud, its owner pulling at it with visible frustration. The others watch with a mix of amusement and sympathy. Eventually the boot comes free with a soft, reluctant sound, leaving behind a deeper impression that slowly fills with water. The man holds it up, shaking his head slightly, then steps carefully back onto the planks. You move on the image, lingering briefly in your mind. There is something about it that feels symbolic. Not dramatic, not significant in any larger sense, but reflective of the constant negotiation between effort and resistance that defines this place. You reach another intersection of planks, pausing just long enough to choose your direction. There is no clear reason for your choice. One path looks no better than the other. You step forward. The boards shift slightly beneath you, then settle, and you continue your movement now. part of the quiet collective rhythm that shapes the city one step at a time. You follow the bend in the planks as they lead you toward a busier stretch where the sound of voices grows denser and more layered. The air changes here. It feels thicker, not just with smoke and dampness, but with intention. People are not only passing through, they are staying, trading, building something more deliberate. The ground becomes firm under the boards and the structures around you stand closer together, their walls straighter, their shapes more confident. Canvas gives way in places to wood that has been cut with greater care. Signs hang above doorways, painted in bold, uneven letters that promise good services or opportunity. You slow as you pass one storefront where tools are displayed with surprising neatness. Picks and shovels line the wall in careful rows, their metal heads catching the dim light. The man behind the counter watches every passerby with steady attention, his eyes quick to assess quicker, still to calculate. A widely accepted historical insight is that many of the most reliable fortunes in Gold Rush San Francisco were made not by miners but by merchants who supplied them. While gold in the ground was uncertain, the demand for tools, clothing and provisions was constant. You step closer not with the intention to buy but to observe. The tools here look sturdier than those you saw earlier, less worn, more deliberate in their construction. The prices, however, reflect that difference. They are high enough to make you pause even now as you begin to understand how this place operates. The merchant notices your hesitation. Good quality, he says, tapping one of the handles lightly. Last longer. You nod, though you cannot be sure of that. In a place where everything changes so quickly, the idea of something lasting feels almost abstract. You move on, your attention shifting to a nearby stall where fabric hangs in loose folds. Coats, shirts, trousers, all in varying states of use. A woman stands behind the display, her posture upright, her expression calm but alert. A lesser-known detail from the time is that clothing was often imported and resold at significant markups, making even worn garments valuable. Many people arrived with limited supplies and quickly found themselves needing replacements that were both costly and scarce. You run your fingers lightly along the edge of a sleeve as you pass. The fabric feels rough but solid. It carries the faint scent of storage, perhaps from a ship's hold or a distant warehouse. You let it fall back into place and continue. The street widens slightly, opening into a space where several wagons stand side by side. Barrels are being unloaded, their surfaces damp from the journey. Men move with practiced coordination, lifting, rolling, stacking. There is a rhythm here that feels more organized than elsewhere, as if repetition has created its own form of order. You watch as one barrel slips from a man's grip, landing with a dull, heavy sound. For a moment, everything pauses. Then, without much discussion, two others step forward, adjusting the load, setting it right again. The flow resumes. An unusual but documented observation is that supply chains during the gold rush were both fragile and remarkably adaptive. Goods travelled long distances by sea and delays were common, yet the constant demand ensured that systems, however imperfect, continued to function. You begin to understand that this place runs on more than ambition. It runs on necessity, on the steady movement of goods and labour that keeps everything from stalling. You continue along the edge of the activity, your steps slower now, your attention drawn to the details of exchange. Coins pass from hand to hand with surprising speed. There is little ceremony in it, no extended negotiation in many cases. Prices seem to be accepted as they are, perhaps because there is little alternative. A man near you counts out a small stack of coins, his brow furrowed as if each one carries weight beyond its value. He hands them over, receives a bundle in return, and moves away without looking back. You wonder what he is traded for. Something essential, no doubt. A question that continues to occupy historians is whether the high cost of living in San Francisco discouraged long-term settlement during the early years, or whether it simply became part of the accepted reality for those determined to stay. As you look around, it seems that acceptance rather than resistance defines most people's behaviour. You step onto another stretch of wooden surface, this one more stable than the last. The boards are thicker, their placement more deliberate. Someone has invested time and effort here, likely with the expectation of continued use. You notice how this stability changes the atmosphere. People linger slightly longer. Conversations stretch. Transactions feel less hurried, though no less purposeful. You pass a small building with its door open, revealing a dim interior where shelves line the walls. Glass bottles catch the light, their contents unlayer. A man stands behind a counter, his movements careful, measured. Medicine, perhaps. The thought lingers, but you do not step inside. Instead, you continue, drawn forward by the steady pull of movement. A group ahead gathers around a notice posted on a wooden board. You cannot read it from where you stand, but the way they lean in suggests it carries information of value. Perhaps news from the mines, perhaps a shipment arrival, perhaps something else entirely. A small but telling detail from the time is that information travelled quickly through informal networks, often spreading faster by word of mouth than through official channels. A single rumour could influence prices, decisions, even the direction people chose to move. You watch as one man reads aloud, his voice carrying just enough for those closest to hear. Others listen, their expressions shifting slightly as the words settle. Then, as quickly as it formed, the group begins to disperse. The information has been absorbed, whatever it was. You continue on your path, leading you through this denser, more structured part of the city. The edges feel sharper here, the purpose clearer. You realize that you are no longer simply observing. You are learning. Not in a formal way, not through instruction, but through exposure. Each step, each glance, each small interaction adds to your understanding of how this place works. You pass another merchant, then another, each offering something slightly different, each operating within the same underlying system. Gold may be the dream that brought you here, but here in these streets it is trade that defines the rhythm. You take a slow breath, feeling the weight of that realization settle quietly within you. Then you keep walking. You move past the line of merchants and into a stretch where the crowd thickens again, though in a different way than before. The urgency remains, but the voices shift. The tones, the rhythms, the languages begin to separate more clearly in your ears now that you are listening for them. At first it feels like a blur, then gradually patterns emerge. A group of men speak rapidly in Spanish near a stack of crates, their hands moving as much as their voices. Nearby another cluster converses in a language you do not recognize, their words rising and falling in a smooth cadence. Further along, English returns, though even that carries accents that suggest distant origins. You slow your pace without meaning to. The realization settles in quietly. This place is not just crowded, it is global. A well-established observation from the period is that San Francisco during the gold rush drew people from across the world, including Latin America, Europe, China, and Australia. Few cities at the time experienced such a rapid and diverse influx of cultures in such a short span. You pass a man carrying 2 buckets suspended from a pole across his shoulders. The motion is steady, practiced. Water sloshes gently with each step, catching the light in brief flashes. He moves with purpose, navigating the uneven ground as if he has done so countless times. You step aside to let him pass, noticing how others do the same without hesitation. There is a quiet understanding here, an awareness of who carries what, who needs space, who moves with urgency. Not all differences are as subtle. Ahead you notice a row of small structures with curved roofs, their design distinct from the others around them. The woodwork is more intricate, the lines more deliberate. Red paper hangs near one doorway, fluttering lightly in the breeze. A lesser-known but important detail is that Chinese immigrants established some of the earliest organized communities in San Francisco during the gold rush, bringing with them traditions, skills, and networks that helped shape the city's development. You pause briefly, observing from a respectful distance. A man stands near the entrance, arranging items on a low table. His movements are careful, precise. He does not rush, even as the world around him continues at its usual pace. There is something grounding in that. You continue on your steps slower, now your awareness expanding in ways that feel less immediate and more reflective. A group of men passes you, their clothing marked by dust and wear that suggests recent travel. Their boots are heavier, with dried mud, their faces lined with fatigue. They speak in English, though their accents differ, one sharper, another softer each, hinting at a different origin. You catch a fragment of their conversation. Something about the mines, something about distance, something about not finding what they expected. You do not hear the rest. A question that continues to invite discussion among scholars is how these diverse groups interacted in daily life. Whether cooperation outweighed tension or whether divisions shaped the experience more strongly than shared goals. As you move through the crowd, you sense both possibilities present at once. You pass a stall where food is being prepared in a way that differs from what you saw earlier. The scent is unfamiliar, though not unpleasant. Spices you cannot name blend into the air, creating a warmth that feels distinct from the simpler meals you've already encountered. A small line forms people waiting with a patience that contrasts with the usual pace. You watch as bowls are filled, passed along, accepted with brief nods. You consider joining but decide to continue. There is more to see. A man nearby calls out in a language you do not understand, holding up a piece of cloth for display. His voice carries confidence even without the need for shared words. A passerby responds with a gesture, then another, and somehow an agreement is reached. Trade does not always require language. You step carefully around a group gathered near a wagon, their attention focused on its contents. The driver speaks loudly, switching between languages with surprising ease, his tone adjusting with each shift. He points, counts, gestures, all while maintaining a steady flow of movement. A curious detail from personal accounts is that multilingual communication became a practical skill in places like this, even for those who had never encountered such diversity before. People learned quickly, adapting phrases, gestures, and tones to bridge gaps. You feel that adaptation happening around you. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but effectively enough. You pass a man seated on a crate, his posture relaxed in contrast to the movement around him. He watches the crowd with a quiet focus as if studying it. His clothing suggests he has been here longer than most worn but maintained. For a moment your eyes meet. He offers a small knowing smile, then looks away. You continue the encounter, lingering briefly in your thoughts. There is a sense that everyone here carries a story, though few are spoken aloud in full. Instead, they reveal themselves in fragments. In accents, in clothing, in the way people move or pause or choose where to stand. You begin to notice how your own presence fits into this. You are one among many, not unique, not central, but part of the larger movement that defines this place. A final observation often noted by those who study this period is that the gold rush transformed San Francisco into one of the most culturally diverse cities in the world at the time, though not without challenges, tensions, and moments of misunderstanding. You feel that complexity now, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. You step onto another stretch of boards, your footing steady, your pace measured. The voices around you continue overlapping, diverging, blending into something that feels almost like a current. You move with it, not fully aware of where it will take you, but no longer resisting its pull. You let the flow of voices carry you forward until the sound shifts again, becoming less layered, more focused. The crowd thins slightly, though not enough to feel empty. Instead, the energy changes direction. Here, movement feels tied to purpose rather than curiosity. You notice it first in the rhythm of bodies. People are not wandering. They are working. A man passes you with the coil of rope slung over his shoulder, the fibres brushing against his coat with each step. Another follows, pushing a handcart that rattles softly as it rolls over uneven boards. Ahead, two figures bend over a stack of crates, their hands moving quickly, lifting, adjusting, securing. You slow drawn into this quieter, steadier kind of activity. An often overlooked but essential truth is that San Francisco during the gold rush relied on countless forms of labour beyond mining. The city itself required constant work to function, from hauling goods to maintaining basic services that allowed everything else to continue. You step aside as a man carrying water approaches again, similar to the one you saw earlier, though this time you watch more closely. The buckets sway gently, their weight balanced carefully across his shoulders. His steps are deliberate, each one placed with attention to the shifting ground. He does not look up. His focus remains fixed ahead. You follow his path for a moment, curious where it leads. He moves toward a row of structures that appear slightly more permanent than those behind you. Wooden walls fitted more tightly, doors that close fully, Windows, though small, that suggest a degree of intention. He disappears inside one of them. He pours outside. Outside listening. There is the sound of water being set down, then voices softer, more contained than those outside. You imagine the water being used for cooking, for washing, for something as simple as cleaning hands after a long stretch of work. A small but revealing detail from the period is that access to clean water was limited and often required significant effort to obtain. Water carriers became an important part of daily life, providing a service that was both essential and physically demanding. You move on, your attention shifting to another kind of work. A line of women sits near a series of tubs, their hands submerged in water that has turned cloudy with use. Fabric moves through their fingers in steady practice motions. Lift, scrub, rinse, wring. The rhythm is almost hypnotic. Steam rises faintly, carrying the scent of soap mixed with damp cloth. You stand at a distance watching. Laundry, something so ordinary in other places, takes on a different weight here. Each piece of clothing represents not just cleanliness but survival. Protection against the cold, the wind, the constant contact with mud and rough surfaces. A lesser-known aspect of Gold Rush life is that laundry services often run by women or immigrant workers became a reliable source of income. While others chased uncertain fortunes, this work provided steady if modest returns. One of the women glances up briefly, noticing your attention. Her expression is neutral, not unkind, but focused. She returns to her work without pause. You continue your steps quieter now, as if the nature of this place invites a different kind of movement. Nearby, a man hammers at a wooden frame, the sound sharp but controlled. Each strike lands with purpose, not hurried, not careless. The structure begins to take shape slowly, one board at a time. You watch as he pauses, wiping his hands against his trousers, then steps back to examine his work. His gaze lingers, measuring, adjusting in his mind before he moves again. A question that remains open among historians is how many people who arrived with dreams of mining eventually shifted into other forms of labor, either by choice or necessity. The evidence suggests that many adapted, finding ways to build lives that did not depend on striking gold. You begin to see how that shift might happen. The work here, though, less dramatic, carries its own kind of stability. It repeats, it sustains. It builds something tangible even if slowly. You pass a group unloading sacks from a wagon, their movements coordinated without much need for speech. One lifts another, receives a third, stacks. The process continues, steady and efficient. Dust rises with each movement, catching the light in soft, drifting patterns. You inhale slightly and catch the dry edge of it in your throat. It contrasts with the dampness of the earlier streets, reminding you how varied the environment here can be, even within a short distance. A curious observation from personal accounts is that the physical demands of daily labor in San Francisco often rivaled those of the mines, though they were less romanticized. The city required strength, endurance, and a willingness to repeat the same tasks day after day. You feel a quiet respect for that, not because it stands out, but because it blends in so completely with everything else. You step onto a firmer section of ground, the boards here set more securely, their edges aligned with greater care. The stability allows you to slow without losing balance, to observe without needing to adjust constantly. You notice how your breathing has changed, more even now, more in rhythm with your stoic. The urgency that once pressed against you has softened, replaced by a steadier awareness. You're beginning to understand that this place is not defined only by the search for gold. It is defined by the work that supports that search. By the hands that carry, build, clean, lift and maintain. By the countless small efforts that together keep the city moving. You take another step, then another, your pace aligning with that quieter rhythm. And for a moment you are not thinking about what lies ahead. You're simply moving within what already is. You move beyond the steady rhythm of labor and into a part of the city where the pace shifts again, not slower but more layered with attention. People still work, still carry, still trade, but there is something else woven through it here. A different kind of awareness, quieter but unmistakable. You notice it in the way conversations pause as someone passes. You notice it in the way eyes follow, then quickly return to whatever task was at hand. You notice it most clearly when you begin to see women. They are not as numerous as the men, That becomes apparent almost immediately, but their presence carries a kind of weight that feels disproportionate to their number. Not because they demand attention, but because attention finds them regardless. A broadly accepted insight from this period is that women were significantly outnumbered in early gold rush San Francisco, sometimes by staggering margins. This imbalance shaped not only social dynamics but also economic opportunities and expectations. You pass a woman standing near a doorway, her posture straight, her expression composed. Her clothing is clean, carefully maintained despite the environment. She speaks with a man whose stance shifts slightly, as if adjusting to her presence, though he tries not to show it. You do not hear their words, but you sense the difference in tone. You continue your steps slower, your awareness sharpened. Further along, you see another woman seated behind a small table, her hands resting lightly on its surface. Items are arranged before her with quiet precision. Small goods, perhaps personal items, things that suggest care rather than necessity. A man approaches, speaks briefly, then leaves with one of the objects. The exchange is calm measured. A lesser-known detail from the time is that some women found ways to establish themselves in business, offering goods or services that catered to the needs of a population far from home. In a city dominated by men, even small touches of familiarity could carry value. You pause nearby, not close enough to intrude, but near enough to observe. She does not look up. Her focus remains steady, her movements unhurried. There is a kind of control in that stillness. You move on. A group of men passes you, their voices louder now, their laughter sharper. One glances toward a nearby building where a sign hangs above the entrance, its lettering bold, its meaning implied more than stated. You do not need to step closer to understand. Inside, voices carry differently, softer in some moments, louder in others, shaped by a different kind of exchange. The doorway remains open, though the interior is dim, the details obscured by the shadow. A point often explored by historians is the range of roles women occupied during the gold rush, from domestic work to entrepreneurship to more precarious forms of labour. The reality was complex, shaped by necessity, opportunity, and the conditions of the time. You do not linger. Instead, you continue along the path, your steps guided by curiosity more than intention. You notice another detail. The way space shifts around certain individuals. A woman walks ahead of you, her pace steady, her gaze forward. People make room without being asked. Not dramatically, not with overt gestures, but enough that her path remains clear. It is subtle. But it is there. A curious observation from personal accounts is that in a city where women were fewer, their presence often influenced behaviour in ways that were not always openly acknowledged. Attention could bring both advantage and risk. You follow at a distance, not intentionally, but because your paths align for a few moments. She turns a corner, disappearing from view. You continue straight. The city unfolds again, returning to its broader rhythm, but you carry that awareness with you now. The sense that within this shrouded, restless place, certain roles and expectations shape the way people move, speak, and even look at one another. You pass a small group gathered near a doorway, their conversation quieter than most. A woman stands among them, speaking with a calm authority that holds the others' attention. They listen, nodding, occasionally their expressions serious. You cannot hear the details, but the dynamic is clear. A question that continues to invite reflection among scholars is how much agency women were able to exercise in such an environment, and how that agency varied depending on circumstance, background, and opportunity. The answers are not simple, and they shift depending on where one looks. You step onto a narrower section of planks, your footing requiring a bit more care again. The shift pulls your attention briefly back to the ground, to the immediate act of moving. Then it lifts again. You pass a window where light reflects off glass, revealing a glimpse of an interior space more refined than most. A table, a chair, objects arranged with intention rather than necessity. It feels almost out of place, yet also like a glimpse of what this city might become. You move on the image, lingering. The presence of women here, though less visible in number, seems to anchor certain spaces, to shape them in ways that are quieter but no less significant. You begin to understand that this place is not only defined by its noise and movement, it's also shaped by moments of stillness, by gestures that are small but deliberate, by roles that shift depending on who is present and how they choose to stand within the constant motion. You take a slow breath, your pace steady, and you continue carrying with you a deeper sense of the subtle balances that exist beneath the surface of this restless city. You leave behind the quieter pockets of conversation and step into an area where the air itself feels different. It is drier here, though not in a comfortable way. There is a faint sharpness to it, something that catches at the back of your throat if you breathe too deeply. At first, you cannot place it. Then you notice the cell. Smoke! Not the gentle, contained wind from cooking fires, but something broader, more lingering, as if it has settled into the very wood of the buildings around you. It does not signal danger in this moment, but it carries the memory of it. You slow your pace. The structures here look newer in some places, older in others, though not in the way that suggests age. Instead, they seem to have been replaced, rebuilt, adjusted. A wall that looks freshly cut stands beside another that appears darkened, its surface marked by something that once touched it and then passed. A well-documented reality of early San Francisco is that fire was a constant threat. Buildings made of wood packed closely together, combined with open flames and limited water supply, created conditions where a single spark could spread with alarming speed. You step carefully along the planks, your awareness sharpening in response to the atmosphere. People move here with a slightly different energy. Still busy, still focused, but with an undercurrent of caution. You pass a man examining a section of a wall, his hand brushing lightly over its surface. He presses against it, testing its strength, then steps back, his expression thoughtful. Nearby, another group works on reinforcing a structure, adding boards in a way that suggests they are not building from nothing but repairing what once stood. An overlooked detail from accounts of the time is that entire sections of the city were destroyed and rebuilt multiple times within just a few years, often in response to fires that spread faster than anyone could control. You imagine it for a moment, the same street you walk now filled with noise and movement suddenly overtaken by flame. The heat, the urgency, the sound of wood cracking and collapsing. Then after the quiet of what remained and followed by the steady return of hammering as people begin again, you continue forward your steps slower, your attention drawn to the signs of both loss and persistence. A building ahead stands slightly apart, its walls, darker than the others, its edges less defined. It looks as though it has been partially rebuilt, the newer wood contrasting with what remains of the old. A man stands in the doorway, his posture still, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond you. You do not approach. Instead, you move past, carrying the impression with you. A question that continues to surface in historical discussions is how people balance the risk of fire with the need to build quickly and cheaply. The urgency of growth often outweighed caution, even when the consequences were well understood. You begin to notice smaller details. Buckets placed near doorways, some filled, others empty. Ladders leaning against walls, not in use but ready. Gaps between buildings that feel slightly wider than necessary, perhaps left intentionally, though not consistently. You pass a narrow alley where the ground is less travelled, the mud thicker, the air stiller. It feels quieter here, but not in a comforting way, more like a pause, a space between movements. You step through it quickly, returning to the more active street beyond. The sound of hammering returns steady and persistent. It feels almost reassuring now, a sign that work continues, that structures rise even after they fall. A curious note from personal records is that some fires spread so rapidly that people had little time to gather their belongings, leaving behind possessions that were later found buried in ash or repurposed by others. You glance at the buildings around you, wondering how many of them carry traces of what came before. How many boards have been replaced, how many structures rebuilt on the same ground. You reach a section where the planks widen again, forming a more stable path. The boards here are newer, their surfaces smoother, their placement more deliberate. Someone has invested effort into this space, but perhaps learning from what happened before. You step onto it, feeling the difference immediately. Your footing steadies. Your pace lengthens slightly. The tension in your shoulders eases just a little. You notice how others respond to this space as well. Movements become more fluid. Conversations stretch a bit longer. There is still urgency, but it no longer presses as sharply against each moment. You pass a small group gathered near a stack of timber, their voices low as they discuss something you cannot quite hear. One gestures toward a nearby structure, then back to the wood as if weighing options. Rebuild here, or somewhere else. The decision feels practical, but also carries a quiet weight. You continue your steps, aligning with the steadier rhythm of this part of the city. The smell of smoke lingers, but it fades slightly as you move further along. It becomes part of the background, no longer sharp, but never fully gone. You take a slow breath, letting it pass through you without resistance. This place, you realize, is not just built, it is rebuilt. Again and again, not because it is easy, but because stopping is not an option. You step forward, your movement is steady, your awareness deeper, now shaped not only by what you see, but by what you understand lies beneath it. And the city continues around you, carrying both its fragility and its persistence in equal measure. You leave the scent of smoke behind as it thins into the background, though it never fully disappears. In its place, another tension begins to surface. It is not carried in the air as clearly. It moves through posture, through glances, through the way conversations lower when certain figures pass. You notice it first in the silence between sounds. The city is still loud, still active, but there are moments where voices pause just a little too quickly, where movement adjusts without explanation. You feel it before you understand it. Then you see it. A small group stands at the edge of a wider path, their stance firm and their attention fixed. They are not working, not trading, they are watching. You slow your steps. A well-grounded observation from this period is that formal law enforcement in early San Francisco struggled to keep pace with the city's rapid growth. As a result, informal systems of justice often emerged, shaped by groups of citizens who took it upon themselves to enforce order. You pass carefully, not drawing attention to yourself, though you cannot help but look. One of the men in this group speaks quietly, his voice low but steady. Another nods his gaze, shifting briefly towards someone further down the path. The exchange is subtle, but it carries weight. You follow the direction of that glance. A man stands near a stack of crates, his posture slightly tense, his movements less certain than those around him. You cannot see anything unusual at first, but the way he's being watched suggests that something has already been decided, or is about to be. You do not linger. Instead, you continue forward, though. Your awareness remains heightened. A lesser-known detail from accounts of the time is that vigilance committees formed in response to perceived lawlessness, sometimes operating with swift and severe methods. Their presence could bring a sense of order, but also introduce new uncertainties about fairness and authority. You pass a building with its door open, voices raised inside. Not in laughter, but in argument. The words are sharp, though not fully clear. You catch fragments, accusations, defenses, something about payment, something about trust. You pause just outside, not stepping in but listening. The argument builds, then breaks, one voice rising above the others before falling away. The door remains open, but the tension spills out into the street, lingering even as you move on. A question that continues to occupy historians is how effective these informal systems of justice truly were, and whether they provided stability or simply replaced one form of disorder with another. The answer seems to shift depending on whose experience is considered. You step onto a narrower stretch of planks, your footing requiring more attention again. The shift pulls your focus briefly back to the ground, to the immediate act of moving. Then it lifts once more. A man approaches from the opposite direction, his pace quick, his gaze forward. As he passes, you notice the way his hand rests near his coat, not gripping anything but ready. It is a small detail, easy to miss, but it carries a quiet implication. You continue your own movement, slightly more measured. The city feels different now. Not more dangerous exactly, but more complex. You pass a small gathering where two men speak in low tones, their heads close together. Another stands nearby, listening without speaking, his eyes scanning the surroundings. It feels less like a casual conversation and more like an exchange that carries consequence. You do not slow this time. You move through, letting the moment pass. An unusual observation from personal records is that disputes in gold rush cities could escalate quickly, often driven by high-stakes limited resources and the absence of consistent legal oversight. At the same time, many conflicts were resolved just as quickly, through negotiation or simple exhaustion. You begin to understand how both could be true. You reach a slightly more open space where the flow of people spreads out. The tension eases here, though it does not vanish entirely. It lingers at the edges, a reminder rather than a presence. A man sits on a crate, his posture relaxed, his hat tilted back just enough to reveal his eyes. He watches the movement around him with a calm that feels deliberate. As you pass, he speaks not directly to you, but into the space between. "Keep your things close," he says. His tone is not threatening, just practical. You nod slightly, though you are not sure if he expects a response. You continue on his words, settling quietly into your awareness. A subtle but telling detail from the time is that personal belongings were often kept close at hand, not out of constant fear, but out of habit formed in an environment where loss could happen quickly and without warning. You adjust your grip on your bundle, feeling its weight more consciously now. The path ahead widens again, the planks giving way to a more stable surface. The shift brings a small sense of relief, though it does not fully dispel the tension you now carry. You notice how your breathing has changed, slightly shallower, more attentive. You take a slow breath, letting it deepen, letting it settle. The city continues as it always does, trade work movement. But now you're aware of something else woven through it. Not just the search for gold, not just the effort to build and sustain, but the constant negotiation of trust, of risk, of how people choose to interact in a place where the rules are still being written. You step forward, your pace steady once more. And you carry that awareness with you as quietly as the man's words. Keep your things close. You carry that quiet warning with you as you move into a part of the city where the atmosphere shifts once again, not toward tension this time, but towards something more restless, more charged with anticipation. The sound reaches you first, laughter sharper than before. Not the brief kind that rises and fades, but something louder, sustained, edged with excitement. It pulls you forward almost without your consent, your steps slowing as the source comes into view. A row of buildings stands ahead, their entrances open, their interiors glowing with lamplight, even though the day has not yet fully dimmed. The light spills outward, catching on the boards beneath your feet, creating patches of brightness that feel almost theatrical. You pause at the edge. Inside movement is constant. Figures lean over tables, their hands moving quickly. Coins shifting from one side to another. The air feels warmer here, thicker, carrying the scent of alcohol sweat and something sharper beneath it. A well-supported insight from the gold rush era is that gambling halls became central features of urban life in San Francisco, offering both entertainment and the possibility, however unlikely, of sudden wealth. You step closer, drawn by the rhythm. A table near the entrance holds your attention. Cards are dealt with practiced ease, the motion smooth, almost elegant. The players watch closely, their expressions controlled, though small signs of tension reveal themselves in the set of a jaw, the tightening of fingers around coins. You do not step inside. Not yet. Instead, you remain just outside observing. A man near the table wins a small round. The coins shift toward him with a soft, satisfying sound. He smiles, but it is brief, restrained. Already his attention returns to the next hand. Another loses. His expression changes only slightly, but you notice the way his shoulders drop just a fraction. A lesser-known detail from the time is that some individuals lost entire fortunes in a matter of hours, drawn into cycles of risk that mirrored the uncertainties of mining itself. You watch as a new round begins. The cards move again. The coins shift. The rhythm continues. You step away, not wanting to be pulled further into it, though. You feel the pull nonetheless. There is something compelling about the possibility, even when you understand the odds. You continue along the row, passing another entrance where music drifts outward. A piano slightly out of tune, its notes uneven but lively. Voices join in, some singing, others simply calling out over the melody. You glance inside. The room is fuller here, the movement less focused, more fluid. People stand in small groups, drinks in hand, their gestures broader, their expressions looser. The tension you felt earlier in the street seems to dissolve slightly in this space, replaced by something more immediate. A different kind of escape. A point often examined by historians is how leisure spaces during the gold rush provided not only entertainment but also a temporary release from the pressures of uncertainty and competition. These places allowed people to step outside the constant calculation of gain and loss, even if only briefly. You move on, the music fading behind you. The street continues, each doorway offering a variation on the same theme. Light sound movement, some quieter, some louder, each with its own atmosphere. You pass a man seated just outside one of these establishments, his back against the wall, his hat pulled low. A small pile of coins rests beside him, though not many. He does not look at them. His gaze is fixed somewhere ahead, unfocused. A curious observation from personal accounts is that the emotional highs and lows of gambling could mirror the experience of the gold rush itself, with moments of intense excitement followed by equally sharp disappointment. You pause briefly, then continue. The light begins to shift around you, not because the sun has set fully, but because the lamps inside these buildings begin to assert themselves more strongly. Their glow creates pockets of brightness that contrast with the dimming street. You step through one of these pockets, feeling the warmth brush against your face, then pass back into the cooler air beyond. The transition, subtle but noticeable. You notice how your own mood responds. A slight lift as you approach the light, a quiet settling as you move away. You pass another table set just outside a doorway. This one simpler, less crowded. Two men sit across from each other, their focus intense, their movements precise. The stakes appear smaller, but the attention is no less sharp. You watch for a moment as one places a coin down the other, responding in kind. The exchange is quiet, almost private. A question that continues to invite reflection is whether these spaces of chance provided genuine opportunity for advancement, or whether they primarily serve to redistribute wealth within a closed system. The answer remains uncertain, shaped by individual outcomes rather than clear patterns. You step away, the image lingering. The street begins to thin as you move further along the concentration of light and sound behind you now. The air cools slightly, the noise softens. You take a slow breath. The energy of that place stays with you, though you are no longer within it. You realize how easily it could draw you in, how quickly time might pass without notice, how subtly the line between watching and participating could disappear. You adjust your pace, grounding yourself in the steady rhythm of your steps. The boards beneath your feet creak softly, familiar now. The city continues offering not just paths to follow, but choices to make, some louder than others, some harder to resist. You move forward, carrying the awareness of what you have just seen not as a warning exactly, but as part of the larger understanding you're building. This place does not only test your strength, it tests your attention and how you choose to use it. You leave the glow of lamps and the echo of laughter behind you, stepping into a quieter stretch where the air feels cooler and less crowded. The sounds of the city do not disappear, but they spread out, losing their sharp edges. Here the rhythm slows just enough for you to notice something else. Your body, the weight in your legs, the dryness in your throat, the faint tightness is across your chest from the mix of smoke dust and damp air you have been breathing since your arrival. You take a slower step, then another. The ground here is firmer, though still uneven. The boards are spaced wider apart, giving glimpses of the packed earth beneath. You notice how your footing adjusts automatically, now your balance correcting without conscious thought. Adaptation again. You pass a small building with its door open, the interior dim but not dark. Shelves line the walls, holding glass bottles of varying shapes and sizes. Some are clear, others tinted their contents, catching what little light enters. A man stands behind a counter, his posture straight, his movements careful. He measures something into a small container, his hand steady, his attention focused. A commonly accepted understanding of the time is that medical knowledge during the gold rush was limited, and access to trained doctors was uneven at best. Many relied on whatever remedies were available, whether effective or not. You pause at the doorway, drawn by the stillness inside. The man glances up, briefly acknowledging your presence without speaking. His expression is neutral, but there is a quiet awareness in his gaze, as if he has seen many pass through with similar curiosity. You step inside. The air feels different here, less chaotic. The scents are sharper, more defined. Alcohol herbs, something medicinal that lingers at the edge of your senses. You move slowly, careful not to disturb anything. On one shelf, you notice small jars filled with powders, their colours ranging from pale to dark. On another, bottles with handwritten labels, their meanings unclear to you. Each item suggests a purpose, though not always a certainty. An unusual detail recorded in personal accounts is that some remedies used during this time included ingredients that would seem questionable by modern standards, from mercury-based compounds to mixtures derived from plants whose effects were not fully understood. You reach out, then stop yourself before touching anything. The man behind the counter finishes his task, then sets the container aside. He does not approach you, but his presence feels attentive, as if he is ready to respond if needed. You nod slightly, then step back outside. The air greets you again with its familiar mix of dampness and smoke, though now you notice it more clearly. The contrast lingers in your senses, reminding you how varied this place can be even within a few steps. You continue along the path, your pace measured. Ahead, you see a small group gathered, near a water source, though it is not what you might expect. A shallow well, perhaps, or a collection point where water has been brought and stored. People stand in line, containers in hand, their expressions patient but watchful. Water again. Always water. A detail often emphasized in studies of this period is that sanitation was a persistent challenge in rapidly growing settlements like San Francisco. Limited infrastructure meant that waste and clean water sources often existed uncomfortably close to one another, contributing to the spread of illness. You watch as a woman fills a container, then steps aside, allowing the next person forward. The process is steady, unhurried, but carries an underlying awareness of importance. This is not optional. This is necessary. You move on, your thoughts settling into a quieter rhythm. The city continues to reveal its layers, not just the visible ones, but the ones that exist beneath, shaping how people live, how they move, how they endure. You pass a man seated on a low stool, his head bowed slightly as he wraps a cloth around his hand. The fabric is already stained, though not heavily. His movements are careful, deliberate, as if he is managing something that requires attention, but not panic. You slow, observing from a distance. He finishes, then flexes his fingers slightly, testing them, before standing and returning to whatever task awaits him. Life continues, even with discomfort, even with uncertainty. A question that remains open in historical discussion is how effective medical practices of the time truly were in improving outcomes, or whether survival often depended more on individual resilience and circumstance than on treatment itself. You feel that uncertainty now, not as a concept, but as a quiet presence. You take a slow breath, noticing the way it fills your chest, the way it carries the air of this place into you. It is not clean, not pure, but it is what is available. You step onto a more stable section of ground, your footing steady, your pace even. The city does not pause for fatigue, for discomfort. It moves, and you move with it. You begin to understand that survival here is not only about strength or luck. It is about adaptation, about recognizing what is within your control and what is not, about finding ways to continue even when conditions are less than ideal. You pass another building. This one closed its door, shut firmly, its windows dark. It stands in contrast to the openness of most others, suggesting a boundary, a separation from the constant flow. You do not stop. Instead, you continue forward your steps, carrying you deeper into the lived reality of this place. The sounds return, the movement thickens slightly, the rhythm resumes, and you carry with you a new awareness, not just of the city, but of your place within it. You leave the quieter edge behind and return to a stretch where the city feels more deliberate, as if it has begun to imagine itself beyond the present moment. The buildings here stand straighter. The gaps between them are more consistent. The ground, though still imperfect, holds a sense of intention. You notice it in the alignment of boards. You notice it in the way walls meet at clearer angles. You notice it in the subtle shift in how people move, less reactive, more assured. A widely recognized pattern from this stage of the gold rush is that San Francisco began transitioning from a temporary encampment into a more permanent settlement. Wood replaced canvas in greater numbers, and plans, however informal, started to guide construction. You slow slightly, letting your eyes trace the details. A two-story structure rises ahead, its frame solid, its windows evenly spaced. It stands out not because it is grand, but because it feels stable. A sign hangs above the entrance, its lettering more carefully painted than most you have seen. You step closer. The wood is smoother here, the edges sanded, the joints fitted with greater precision. Someone has taken time not just to build, but to refine. A less familiar detail from the period is that some of the earlier substantial buildings were constructed using materials brought from distant places, repurposed from vessels, or assembled from prefabricated sections that arrived ready to be raised. You run your hand lightly along the surface of a nearby wall, feeling the difference. It does not catch on splinters as easily. It feels intentional. You move on your steps, echoing more clearly now on the firmer boards. The sound changes, less hollow, more defined. You pass a narrow street that opens into a wider space where several buildings form a loose square. The area feels almost organized, though not formally. People gather here in small clusters, their movements less hurried, their conversations slightly longer. It feels like a place meant to be used, not just passed through. You pause at the edge. A man stands near the center, speaking to a small group. His voice carries not loudly, but with clarity. The others listen, their attention focused. He gestures occasionally, pointing toward different parts of the space as if outlining something. Plans, perhaps. Ideas. A question often explored in historical studies is how early urban planning emerged in places that began so chaotically. Whether it was guided by individuals with vision or shaped more gradually by collective need remains a topic of ongoing discussion. You watch for a moment, then continue. The buildings here suggest something more than immediate survival. They hint at permanence, at the idea that this place might endure. You pass a doorway where the interior reveals a table and chairs arranged with care. The space feels almost familiar, though you cannot say why. It resembles something from elsewhere, something more settled. You do not enter. Instead, you let the image settle in your mind as you move on. A curious observation from early descriptions is that some residents began to recreate elements of the lives they had left behind, bringing in furniture, decorations, and habits that reflected a desire for normalcy amid constant change. You feel that impulse here, not strongly but enough to notice. You step onto another section of walkway, this one wide enough that people can pass without hesitation. The flow of movement feels smoother, less interrupted by the need to adjust. You notice how your own posture shifts. Your shoulders relax slightly. Your steps lengthen. The environment shapes you just as it shapes everything else. You pass a building under construction, though unlike others you have seen, this one follows a clearer pattern. The frame rises evenly, the spacing consistent. The men working on it move with coordination that suggests a shared understanding of the plan. They do not need to speak much. Each knows where to place the next piece. You watch as a beam is lifted into position, guided carefully, then secured with the precise strikes of a hammer. The sound rings out sharp but controlled. It feels different from the earlier construction you observed, more measured, more certain. You move on the rhythm of that work, echoing softly in your thoughts. The city is changing, not all at once, not everywhere, but in places like this the shift is visible, from temporary to lasting, from improvised to intentional. You pass another structure where glass windows reflect the muted light, their surfaces clean enough to mirror the movement around them. It is a small detail, but it stands out. Clarity. Reflection. You catch your own image briefly as you pass. Then it is gone. You continue your steps steady, your awareness expanding beyond the immediate. You begin to sense that this place is not only reacting to the present, it is beginning to anticipate the future. A future where the mud might be replaced, where the buildings stand longer, where the patterns of movement become streets and the clusters of structures become neighborhoods. You take a slow breath. The air still carries the familiar mix of smoke and dampness, but now it feels layered with something else. Expectation. You step forward, your pace aligned with the steadier rhythm of this part of the city. And as you move, you carry with you the sense that what you're witnessing is not just a moment in time, but the early shape of something that will continue to grow, to change, to define itself long after this day has passed. You drift out of the more orderly square and into a street where the light begins to change again. It softens not because the day has fully ended, but because evening is approaching in that slow, almost hesitant way. The edges of buildings blur slightly and the spaces between them fill with a gentler kind of shadow. The city does not quiet, it transforms. You notice it in the sound first. The sharp rhythms of work begin to loosen. Hammering fades into the distance. Voices shift in tone, less focused, more open. Laughter returns, though it carries a different weight now, less driven, more searching. You follow the sound. Ahead, a doorway glows with warm light brighter than the fading sky. Music drifts outward, clearer than before. Not just a piano this time, but a combination of instruments slightly uneven but lively enough to hold attention. You step closer, stopping just at the threshold. Inside, the space feels fuller, but not crowded in the same way as earlier. People stand in small groups, their movements slower, their gestures broader. The urgency of the day seems to have loosened its grip, replaced by something more fluid. A widely noted feature of Gold Rush San Francisco is the rapid growth of entertainment spaces such as theatres, music halls and saloons, which provided both distraction and connection for a population living with constant uncertainty. You lean slightly to the side watching. A performer stands near the front of the room, her voice rising above the background noise. It is not perfect, but it is confident, carried by the energy of the space. The audience responds with scattered applause, some more enthusiastic than others. You notice how people gather around these moments, not tightly, but with intention. A man near the wall lifts a glass, his expression relaxed in a way you have not yet seen during the day. Another leans forward, speaking quietly to someone beside him, his posture less guarded. You remain outside, not separate, but not fully part of it either. A lesser-known detail from the time is that many performers in these early venues came from varied backgrounds, some with formal training, others simply adapting their skills to the opportunities available in a rapidly growing city. You listen as the music shifts the rhythm, changing slightly, the melody drifting into something to fitter. For a moment the space feels almost calm. Then the noise rises again, conversation returning, movement continuing. You step back, letting the sound fade slightly as you move along the street. The light continues to shift. Lamps are lit one by one, their glow forming small islands of warmth in the deepening dusk. The contrast between light and shadow becomes more pronounced, guiding your attention in subtle ways. You pass another doorway, this one quieter, the interior dimmer. A few figures sit at tables, their heads close together, their voices low. The atmosphere here feels more contained, less outward. You pause briefly, then continue. A point often considered in historical discussions is how these spaces of leisure contributed to the social fabric of the city, offering not just entertainment, but opportunities for connection, negotiation, and even the forming of partnerships. You begin to see that now, not just as a concept, but as something lived. You pass a small group gathered around a storyteller, his voice steady, his gestures measured. The listeners stand close, their attention focused, their expressions shifting with the flow of the tale. You cannot hear the full story, but you catch fragments. Distant places, difficult journeys, moments of fortune both found and lost. A curious detail from personal accounts is that storytelling became a common form of evening entertainment, allowing people to share experiences and shape the narrative of their time in ways that extended beyond written records. You feel drawn to it for a moment, then you move on. The street opens slightly, giving you a wider view of the city as it settles into night. The movement does not stop, but it changes. The edges soften. The pace becomes less urgent, though no less present. You notice how your own steps adjust, slower, more deliberate. The events of the day settle quietly within you. The harbour, the mud, the work, the tension, the glimpses of something more permanent. All of it feels closer now, as if it has gathered just beneath the surface of your awareness. You pass a final doorway where music lingers softer, now almost fading. The light spills out in a thin line across the boards, then breaks as you step through it. Beyond, the street grows dimmer, the sounds spread out, the city breathes differently. You take a slow breath, feeling the cool air fill your lungs, carrying with it the layered sense of everything you have passed through. Smoke, wood, food, people, it is not a single scent. It is a mixture, a reflection of everything that exists here at once. You continue your pace steady, your awareness calm. The city at night does not ask less of you, but it allows you to move through it in a different way. Not just reacting, but observing. Not just adjusting, but understanding. You take another step, then another, letting the rhythm carry you forward. And for the first time since your arrival, you feel a quiet sense of distance from the urgency that surrounds you. Not removed, but softened, as if the city itself has taken a breath, and you for a moment breathe with it. You continue walking as the evening deepens, the city settling into a quieter rhythm that still never quite reaches silence. The lamps now hold their ground against the fading sky, each one casting a steady glow that softens the rough edges of wood and mud. Your steps feel slower without effort, not because you are tired in a sharp way, but because the day has stretched across you, leaving behind a gentle weight that encourages stillness. Ahead you notice a small cluster of people gathered around a narrow table. Papers lie spread across its surface, held down at the corners by small objects to keep them from shifting in the breeze. The figures lean in their attention, fix their voices low but intent. You move closer, not intruding but near enough to see. Printed sheets, ink still dark, the letters clear enough even in the dim light. An established pattern from this period is the rapid emergence of newspapers and printed notices in San Francisco, which became essential for spreading news announcements and rumors in a city that changed almost daily. One of the men lifts a page, reading aloud in a steady voice. The others listen, their expressions shifting slightly with each line. You catch fragments as the words carry just far enough. A shipment arrived. A fire contained. A claim discovered somewhere inland. Information moves here not as a steady stream, but as a series of pulses, each one shaping decisions, expectations, and conversations. You watch as the reader lowers the page, handing it to another. The exchange is quiet, almost ceremonial, as if the paper itself carries weight beyond its physical form. A lesser-known detail is that some of the earliest newspapers in San Francisco were printed under difficult conditions with limited equipment and inconsistent supplies, yet they still managed to circulate widely among the population. You step back slightly, letting others move closer. The group shifts, dispersing slowly, each person carrying a piece of what they have just learned. The information will not stay contained here. It will move outward, carried by voices, by memory, by repetition. You continue along the path, your thoughts settling into a slower pattern. The city at night feels more reflective, not quiet, but less immediate. You pass a building where a single lamp burns inside its light, steady and contained. Through the window you see a man seated at a desk, his head bent over a sheet of paper. His hand moves writing, pausing, then continuing. You pause for a moment at watching. The act feels different from everything else you've seen today. Less reactive, more deliberate. A question that continues to invite discussion is how information shaped the development of San Francisco during the gold rush, whether it brought clarity to a chaotic environment or simply added another layer of uncertainty as rumors mixed with fact. You move on the image, lingering. The street narrows slightly, the buildings closer together, their shadows overlapping. The light from the lamps stretches across the boards, forming long, thin shapes that shift as people pass through them. You notice how your own shadow moves with you, lengthening, shortening, then blending into others. You pass a small group engaged in quiet conversation, their voices low enough that you cannot catch the words. Their posture suggests focus rather than urgency, as if they are considering something rather than reacting to it. You do not slow. You let the moment pass. A curious detail from the personal recollections is that news and rumours often travelled faster than official confirmation, leading to situations where decisions were made based on incomplete or inaccurate information. You think back to the group around the table, to the way they listened, to the way they carried the words away with them. You begin to understand how easily information can shape action, even when it is uncertain. You step onto a slightly uneven section of boards, your footing adjusting automatically. The movement feels natural now, your body responding without the need for conscious correction. You pass another doorway where voices drift outward, softer than before, more measured. Inside, a few figures sit around a table, their attention focused on a set of papers similar to those you saw earlier. Discussion continues. The city does not stop thinking even as it slows. You continue your pace, steady your awareness. Just calm. The air feels cooler now, the dampness settling more fully as the night deepens. You pull your coat slightly closer, feeling the fabric hold a bit of warmth against you. The sounds of the city spread out further, each one more distinct, less layered. Footsteps. Steps. A distant voice. The faint creak of wood. You take a slow breath, letting it fill your lungs, then release it just as slowly. The day has moved through you. The city has revealed itself in pieces. And now as night settles in, those pieces begin to arrange themselves into something more coherent, not fully understood, but more familiar. You take another step, then another, your movement. Unhurried. And you continue carrying with you the quiet awareness of how the information, like everything else here, shapes the way this place lives and grows. You keep walking as the night air settles more firmly around you, the coolness deepening in a way that feels both sharp and steady. The warmth from earlier streets fades behind you, replaced by a cleaner, thinner feeling that moves across your face with each step. The wind picks up slightly, not strong but persistent. It slips between the buildings, finding every gap, brushing against your coat, your hands, the edges of your sleeves. You pull the fabric closer around you without thinking, adjusting to the shift. San Francisco has its own way of touching you through the air. A well-recognized feature of the region is the presence of fog and coastal winds that shape daily life, often bringing sudden changes in temperature even within a single day. What begins as mild can turn cool quickly, especially as the evening approaches. You feel that now. The dampness returns not from the ground this time, but from the air itself. It settles lightly against your skin, a thin layer that seems to soften everything it touches, while also making it feel slightly heavier. You step onto a stretch of boards that glisten faintly, catching the lamplight in small reflections. Moisture's gathered there, turning the surface subtly slick. Your footing adjusts automatically, your steps shorter, more careful. You pass a man who pauses to rub his hands together, then breathes into them, trying to warm them slightly. His movements are small, almost habitual, as if this is something he's done many times before. You recognize the gesture, the body finding ways to respond. An often overlooked detail from first-hand accounts is how quickly newcomers had to adapt to the local climate, particularly the sudden chill that could arrive with the evening fog. Clothing that seemed sufficient during the day often proved inadequate at night. You shift your shoulders, feeling the coolness settle more fully into you. Ahead, the fog begins to gather. At first, it is only a faint softening of the distance, a slight blur at the edges of buildings. Then it thickens, moving in quietly, wrapping itself around structures, narrowing your view. The lamps become halos. The spaces between them fade. You slow your pace, not out of caution, but because the environment invites it. The world feels closer now, more contained, as if the city has drawn a curtain around itself. You pass a doorway where light spills out, cutting through the fog in a narrow beam. Inside, figures move their outlines, soften their details, obscured. The scene feels almost distant, even though you stand just outside it. You continue letting the fog settle around you. A question that continues to interest historians is how environmental conditions influenced daily routines and health during the gold rush, particularly in a city where shelter and infrastructure were still developing. The answers vary, shaped by personal experience and available resources. You feel that influence now, not as a concept, but as a presence. The air enters through your lungs cooler than before, carrying a faint trace of salt. The ocean is not visible from where you stand, but it makes itself known through the air, through the way it moves, through the scent that lingers just beneath everything else. You pass a small group gathered near a lamp, their faces partially illuminated, their voices low. They stand close together, not just for conversation, but for warmth, sharing the small pocket of heat that the light seems to create. You notice how people adjust, how they draw closer to walls that block the wind, how they linger near doorways where warmth escapes, how they move with a slight awareness of the cold even as they continue their routines. A curious detail from early descriptions is that some residents layered clothing in ways that were not always fashionable, but were practical, combining materials from different sources to manage the shifting conditions. You glance down at your own coat, feeling its weight, its limits. It is enough. For now. You continue along the path, your steps steady, your breath visible in faint, brief clouds that vanish almost as soon as they appear. The fog thickens further, softening the sound of the city. Voices become more distant, their edges blurred. Footsteps lose their sharpness, blending into a quieter rhythm. It feels almost peaceful, not silent, but softened. You reach a point where the path widens slightly, though the edges are harder to see now. The boards extend into the mist, their direction clear only a few steps ahead. You follow them, trusting the path, trusting your balance, trusting the rhythm you have learned. A final observation often noted in accounts of the time is that the environment of San Francisco, its fog, its wind, its shifting conditions, became an integral part of daily life, shaping not just comfort, but behavior, movement, and even mood. You feel that shaping now. The city has not changed, but your experience of it has. The sharpness of the day has given way to something softer, more reflective. You take a slow breath, letting the cool air fill you, then release it gently. Your pace slows, not because you marred, but because the night, the fog, the quiet movement of the city all invite you to. And you accept that invitation, continuing forward with a calm that feels new but not unfamiliar. You continue through the fog, your steps guided more by memory now than by sight. The path beneath your feet feels familiar, even as the edges of the world remain softened and uncertain. Each board responds with a quiet, steady creak, grounding you in something tangible as everything else drifts slightly out of focus. Your breathing settles into a slow rhythm, in and out, matching your pace. The city feels different at this hour, not because it has stopped, but because it has loosened its hold on urgency. The sharp edges of the day have worn down, leaving behind something quieter, more reflective. You pass a figure standing alone near the edge of the walkway, his posture still, his gaze lost somewhere in the mist. He does not move as you approach, nor as you pass. For a moment, he feels like part of the environment itself, a fixed point in a shifting landscape. Then he exhales, and the faint cloud of his breath reminds you that he is simply another person paused in thought. An established understanding of life during the gold rush is that not everyone who came here found what they were searching for. Many arrived with clear expectations, only to find those expectations shifting as reality unfolded. You feel that idea settle gently into your awareness, not as disappointment, but as adjustment. You continue your steps unhurried, your attention turning inward as much as outward. The city around you becomes a backdrop, its sounds softened by the fog, its movements less defined. You begin to notice your own thoughts more clearly, the way they move, the way they settle. You think of the harbour, of the first step onto the dock, of the uncertainty that filled you then. It feels distant now, though not in time, but in feeling. A lesser-known observation from personal accounts is that many individuals adapted their goals over time, shifting from the initial pursuit of gold to other forms of work or stability as circumstances changed. You begin to understand how that might happen, not as a single decision, but as a gradual process, a series of small adjustments that over time lead somewhere different from where you first intended. You pass a dimly lit doorway where a single figure sits, his head bowed, his hands resting loosely in his lap. He does not look up as you move by. There is no sign of distress, no clear emotion at all, just stillness. You do not linger. Instead, you carry the image with you, letting it settle alongside your own quiet reflections. A question that continues to be explored is whether most people who came to San Francisco during the gold rush ultimately viewed their experience as success or failure, or whether those categories fail to capture the more complex reality of their lives. You feel that complexity now, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet space between expectations and experience. The fog shifts slightly, thinning just enough to reveal a longer stretch of the path ahead. The boards extend forward, their lines clearer, their direction more certain. You follow them. Your steps feel lighter now, not because the ground has changed, but because your relationship to it has. You're no longer reacting to every shift, every uncertainty. You are moving within it. A curious detail from recorded recollections is that some individuals found a sense of belonging not in achieving their original goals, but in adapting to the life that unfolded around them, finding meaning in the everyday rhythms of the city. You sense that's that possibility, not as a conclusion, but as an opening. You pass another group, smaller this time, their conversation quiet, their movement slow. They do not seem in a hurry to go anywhere. They simply stand sharing the space the moment. You move past them, your pace steady. The city feels less like something you are moving through and more like something you are part of. Not fully, but enough. You take a slow breath, the cool air filling you, then releasing just as gently. Your thoughts settle further. The day's impressions begin to blend, no longer separate moments, but part of a continuous flow. You step onto a section of boards that feel especially firm, their surface smooth, their placement secure. The stability allows you to relax just a little more, your body responding without effort. You continue your awareness as set calmish, your movement steady. The fog begins to thin again, the outlines of buildings returning, the lamps becoming clearer points of light. The city reappears, not new, but familiar in a different way. You realize that the place itself has not changed, but you have. Your understanding has deepened. Your expectations have shifted. Your pace has adjusted. You take another step, then another, carrying that quiet awareness with you. And as you move forward, you no longer feel the same urgency to reach something ahead. You are already within it. You continue as the fog thins and the outlines of the city return one edge at a time. The lamps regain their shape, no longer soft halos, but defined points of light. The buildings rise again from the haze, their lines clearer, their presence more grounded. Your steps feel certain now, not because the path is easier, but because you have learned how to move within it. The boards beneath you respond in familiar ways. The slight give, the quiet creak, the subtle shift that once required your full attention now feels almost expected. Your body adjusts without thought, your balance steady, your pace even. You pass a row of buildings that you have not seen before, or perhaps you have, and simply did not notice them earlier. They stand with a quiet confidence, their structures more aligned, their surfaces more refined. Windows reflect the lamplight in small, steady glimmers. There is a sense here that something has begun to settle, not completely, but enough to be felt. A broadly recognized development during the gold rush years is that San Francisco rapidly transformed from a temporary settlement into a more established city with increasing attention given to infrastructure governance and long-term planning. You slow slightly, letting your gaze move across the details. A sign hangs more securely, its lettering clean and deliberate. A doorway stands open, but not loosely, its frame solid, its hinges holding firm. Even the ground beneath your feet, though still imperfect, feels more considered. You step forward, your awareness expanding beyond the immediate. You begin to notice how people move differently here. Not rushed, not aimless, but purposeful in a quieter way. A man walks past you carrying a small bundle, his posture upright, his gaze forward. He does not scan the surroundings as others did earlier. He moves as if he knows where he's going and why. You continue your pace, matching that steadier rhythm. A lesser-known detail from this period is that as the city grew, some residents began to establish routines that resembled more settled lives, creating patterns of work, rest, and social interaction that differed from the earlier, more chaotic days. You feel that shift now, not as a dramatic change, but as a subtle one. A quiet layering of structure over movement. You pass a small group gathered near a doorway, their conversation calm, their gestures measured. They are not negotiating, not arguing, not reacting to something immediate. They are simply speaking, their attention focused on one another. It feels different. You move on the moment, lingering. A question that continues to be examined is how quickly San Francisco developed a sense of identity during this period, whether it emerged naturally from the convergence of people and experiences, or whether it was shaped more deliberately by those who sought to define it. You consider that as you walk. What does this place feel like now, not just in its parts, but as a whole? You pass a building with its windows lit from within the light, steady, not flickering. Inside, figures move with a calm that suggests familiarity. The space feels lived in, not just occupied. You pause for a brief moment, then continue. A curious observation from early accounts is that some residents began to take pride in the city itself, not just in the opportunities it offered, but in the idea of what it was becoming. You begin to sense that pride, not loudly, but quietly, in the way structures are maintained, in the way people carry themselves, in the way spaces are used. You step onto a wider section of boards, your footing secure, your movement fluid. The city around you feels less like a series of separate moments and more like a continuous experience. You are no longer moving from one thing to another. You are moving within something that holds together. You take a slow breath, the air cooler now, the scents more blended, less distinct. Smokewood dampness all present, but softened into a single familiar layer. You pass another figure standing near the edge of the walkway, his gaze directed outward, beyond the immediate street. You follow his line of sight briefly, though there is nothing specific to see, just the city, as it is. As it continues to become, you move on your step, steady, your awareness calm. The urgency that once pressed against you has faded into something quieter, not gone, but no longer dominant. You realize that you are no longer searching for a place within this city. You have found one. Not fixed, not permanent, but real. You take another step, then another, feeling the rhythm of your movement align with the rhythm of the place itself. And as you continue, you carry with you a sense that this city, for all its uncertainty, has begun to understand itself. And in doing so, has allowed you to understand it a little more as well. You continue forward as the night settles more fully, the city now wrapped in a quieter kind of presence. The movement has not stopped, but it has softened into something more distant, more layered, as if each sound has found its place and no longer competes to be heard. Your steps slow without effort. The boards beneath you feel steady, familiar, their subtle shifts now part of your rhythm rather than something you must think about. The air is cool, carrying a gentle dampness that rests lightly against your skin. Ahead, the space begins to open. Not suddenly, but gradually. The buildings pull back just enough to reveal a wider stretch, and beyond it, a darker shape that you recognize even before it becomes fully clear. The bay. You move toward it, your pace unhurried, your attention calm. The lamps grow fewer here, their light fading as you approach the edge. The water reflects what little light remains, its surface moving in slow, quiet patterns that catch and release the glow. You stop. For a moment you simply stand. The harbour is not as crowded as it was when you first arrived, or perhaps it only feels that way now. The ships are still there, their outlines darker against the water, their masts rising into the night like silent markers. A well-established understanding of this place is that the harbour remained central to San Francisco's life during the gold rush, serving as both an entry point and a constant reminder of the wider world beyond the city. You look out across the water, your gaze following the faint movement of the tide. The sound is different here. Softer. The distant murmur of the city blends with the quiet rhythm of the water, creating a balance that feels almost even. You take a slow breath. The air carries a trace of salt cleaner than the streets, though still touched by everything that surrounds it. You feel the day settle within you, not as a series of moments, but as a continuous flow. The harbour, the mud, the work, the noise, the light, the fog. Each part connects, forming something that feels whole. A lesser-known detail is that some ships in the harbour were eventually abandoned so completely that they became part of the shoreline itself, filled in and built over as the city expanded. You imagine that now. The idea that what floats today may become foundation tomorrow. You shift your weight slightly, your boots steady on the firmer ground near the edge. A question that continues to be explored is how much of San Francisco's early character was shaped by these rapid transformations and how much endured as the city grew more stable over time. You let the question rest without needing an answer. The water moves, the ships remain, the city breathes behind you. You turn slightly, not fully away from the bay, but enough to take in the outline of the street you have walked. The lamps glow softly, their light no longer sharp but warm and distant. You see the paths you have followed, though not in detail, only in feeling, the places where you stepped carefully, the places where you paused, the places where you learned. A quiet observation from those who lived through this time is that the experience of the gold rush was not defined solely by the search for gold, but by the life that unfolded around that search, the routines, the adjustments, the moments that filled each day. You feel that now, not as something you have studied, but as something you have lived, even if only for a short while. You take another slow breath, letting it out gently. Your body feels heavier now, not with strain, but with a kind of readiness to rest. The urgency has faded. The movement has softened. The city continues, but it no longer presses against you in the same way. You step back slightly from the edge, your gaze lingering on the water, for just a moment longer before returning to the path behind you. You do not need to go far, not tonight. You begin to walk again, your steps slow, your awareness calm. The boards greet you once more, their familiar creak steady beneath your feet. The lamps guide you, their light soft, their presence reassuring. The sounds of the city remain, but they are distant now, like something remembered rather than experienced. You move through them gently without resistance, and as you walk, the details begin to fade. Not disappear, but soften. The edges blur. The sounds quiet. The movement slows. You feel the weight of the day settle fully, your thoughts becoming lighter, your awareness narrowing to the simple rhythm of your steps. In and out, step and breath, breath and step. The city with all its noise, its movement, its complexity drifts into the background, and what remains is something quieter, something steadier. You continue for a few more steps, then let your pace slow even further. There is nothing left to reach, nothing left to understand, only the quiet presence of where you are, and the gentle awareness of how far you have come within it. You take one final breath, slow and even, letting it carry you into stillness. And you rest there at the edge of the city and the water where everything softens into calm. As the night deepens, you allow the last traces of the city to settle gently into the background of your mind. The sounds once so vivid now feel distant, as if they belong to another place, another time. The harbour, the streets, the shifting light all fade into a soft, continuous presence that no longer asks anything of you. You let your shoulders relax fully. Your breath slows, becoming steady and quiet. The air around you feels cooler, but not uncomfortable. It wraps around you in a way that feels gentle, almost protective. The faint scent of the sea lingers clean and calm, carrying with it the sense of distance, of space, of something beyond the edges of the city. You imagine the water moving slowly in the dark, its surface rising and falling with a rhythm that never rushes, never forces itself forward. That same rhythm begins to settle within you, guiding your breath, your thoughts, your awareness. There is no need to hold on to the details. Now. No need to follow every sound or remember every step. The city remains, but you no longer need to move through it. You are still, and in that stillness, everything softens. The weight of the day dissolves the edges of your thoughts, becoming lighter, less defined. Each breath carries you further into that quiet space where nothing demands your attention. You rest there gently, calmly, as the night holds steady around you. Sweet dream. So